Give me your tired, poor, huddled masses yearning to breathe free. As this picture reflects, it's our Statue of Liberty, Lady Liberty welcoming people on Ellis Island. So, how did we get from there to where we're at today? My topic, of course, is immigration and DACA. We're in a different place. We have different challenges. This country is facing, I think, a dilemma in how we're treating our undocumented population. I think, like everything, we need to start from the beginning. So it begins. I want to give you a little bit of a history of immigration. Don't worry, there won't be a quiz at the end, although it might provide some reflection for you as you think about where we find ourselves today. The first is a set of policies that I want to talk about that were really designed to be exclusive and not inclusive. The first is the Naturalization Act of 1790. This act was enacted first to try to provide some guidance on what a citizen of the U.S. or who a citizen of the U.S. is. And in this case, it excluded those who were not free white people, meant to exclude those who were slaves, former slaves, Native Americans. Second is the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, which, as its name states, was meant to exclude Chinese from gaining citizenship to our country. An interesting thing to note is that many of these Chinese came to this country recruited to come to build our railroad system. And when that was done, they wanted to provide some, incentive for self-deportation. The third is Supreme Court case of Plyer versus Doe in 1982. In this case, the Supreme Court ruled that the U.S. must provide K-12 education for undocumented students. They couldn't be denied access to public education. But I, like many others, do not feel like it went far enough because it excluded a college education. Undocumented. What does that mean? Well, undocumented is an umbrella term that really there's three categories that fall underneath it that many of us, when we use the term undocumented, are referring to three categories. The first is those who have entered the country unauthorized. And this is something that our media tends to focus on. Folks crossing the Rio Grande, coming on ships, however it may be, to gain unauthorized access to our country. The second category is those folks who are here who are undocumented because they've overstayed their visas. Many of them were students at one time, either got work visas to come to the U.S., and they've expired and they're still in the country. The third are folks who are in process to gain legal permanent residency. So when I use the term undocumented, those are the three categories I'm usually referring to. The reality is, though, that many of our undocumented folks in this country are in that second category, not the first category. They're folks who've overstayed their visas. A majority of our undocumented population are folks who've overstayed their visa, not the folks who our media tends to focus on. Our system is broken. It needs to be fixed. So, where I want to go next is, I know many of us watch the news, whether it's CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. We tend to get a lot of our information from these media sites, and they tend to oversimplify the issue of immigration. And I think there's three myths in particular that I want to talk about today that I think most folks don't know a lot about. The first is the idea of what you may hear is, why don't they just get in line? Where's that line? Well, for many of our undocumented population, that line does not exist. There are three lines usually when we talk about that line. The first line is for folks who have some highly skilled or have a skill that the country currently needs. The second is those that are seeking some type of, they're fleeing political, I just forgot the term, sorry, are fleeing some type of, they're seeking asylum. They're being persecuted. Now, this one's interesting because our current president seems to think that it needs to be limited even more as to what asylum means by ending TPS and some other forms of visa programs. The third is family reunification, or when a family member wants to sponsor an immediate family to come to the country. But the reality is, as I stated earlier, many of our undocumented people in this country do not fall within either of these three categories. So there is no line for them. The second myth is that they bring lots of crime to this country. Well, the reality is that in most major cities, the immigrant population actually does not create a lot of the crime. It is a native-born population. And those that tend to be incarcerated are more native-born. So this crime myth does not exist. The third is that they don't pay taxes. But the reality is that immigrants do pay taxes. Undocumented people do pay taxes in the forms of sales tax, property tax, income tax. Now, you might be wondering, how do they pay income tax? Well, many of those in our undocumented population have individual tax ID numbers, or ITINs, and they are able to file federal income tax. And this is an interesting problem because they pay into a system they don't have access to when they retire. There's no Social Security benefits for them or their families, yet they're paying into the system. So these are the three myths I just want to make sure we talk about, or at least you start to think about. The numbers. I want us to turn our attention to undocumented students. The numbers show that the undocumented population is estimated to be between 11 and 12 million in this country. 1.1 million of those 11 to 12 are in our K through 12 system. On an annual basis, 65,000 of them graduate from high school. And from that 65,000, about 10 to 15% end up enrolling in some form of higher education at many of your institutions. What are the challenges that these students face? Well, the three big ones, I think, and those doing research, are loneliness, depression, and fear of deportation. Now, some of you may be working with students who are DACA students. Some of you may have students also that are not DACA students, that are completely undocumented. They have no form of residency here or a number so they can lean into. This fear of deportation is a reality for many of our students. I remember in the pre-DACA stage where I was working with a lot of students in Oregon, this was a real fear for them, and not only for themselves, but their family. Many of our students are in blended families, meaning that their parents are undocumented or they have a sibling that's undocumented. They may be undocumented, but one of their siblings is a U.S. citizen. And that's a tough place to be, right? Because you don't know if you're going to go home and someone's not going to be home because they've just been deported or they got pulled over with a busted taillight and they get picked up. This fear is a real fear of our students, our undocumented students. Depression. Very, very big condition in our undocumented student population. Anxiety, suicidal ideation. Why? Because there's guilt if they're in blended families, but also because they don't know what's going to come next for them. Particularly in where we find ourselves today, is DACA going to end? Is it not going to end? What am I to do? What am I to do with my family? And loneliness. Now, California is a state where we really do a lot for our undocumented student population. But some of you are in states that don't really do a whole lot. And some of our students don't feel safe in telling others about their status. And so there's a real sense of loneliness, that they're the only ones on a campus. So what can you do? Well, I think for myself and others who are point people on our campuses, we need to provide safe spaces. We need to designate someone on our campus that could be that point person so students know who to go to or have an idea of who to go to. DACA. DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It was an executive order put into place by President Obama in 2012. There's an estimate of 800,000 students who are receiving DACA currently. The three states that do have the most DACA recipients are California, Texas, and New York. Some of you are in those states. I think it's important to note this is a temporary status. It's renewable every 2 years. It's not a permanent residency. It's not a path to citizenship. It's important for us to realize that. Again, the uncertainty. I think I also want to point out that DACA, the window for DACA is still in place. It's important to note that even if some of our students who have received DACA at one point and it did expire, because of the current injunctions against our current president's or the Department of Justice move to end DACA, the window is still open, either for students who are currently in DACA or have received DACA at one point. So, it's foggy, it's murky. We don't know what the future holds for DACA, for immigration. Even as of this morning, there was a push in Congress to get something on the floor. Our Republican friends gathered and circled the wagons, and now that petition has ended, at least temporarily, because a promise was made that maybe somewhere down the line they would take up immigration. So, again, dreams deferred, broken promises. This is a tough, tough place for us and our students to find ourselves in. But what can your campuses do? What can you do? Well, this image of the monarch butterfly has become a symbol for our undocumented students, for our immigrants. One, because the monarch butterfly is resilient. But some of the things that we're doing, just to give you an idea of what we're doing at Whittier College, as mentioned, Hispanic serving institution, minority serving institution, private institution, is we formed an advisory committee, which is what we tend to do in higher ed. We form a committee. But this committee is a committee that crosses all kinds of different people on campus, faculty, staff, and students, to come together and look at our policies and what we have in place, what our website communicates. The other thing we've done is provide additional financial aid at times. I had a student this year who in the fall semester came to me and said, Dean Pérez, or JP, that's the other term people use to refer to me on campus, I can't make ends meet. I need some help. So we provided additional aid to get her through her fall semester and then through her spring semester, and she graduated with a child. They both walked the stage. It was a very emotional moment for me. We, the trustees, have initiated last year a Poet Sanctuary Protection Policy. We're not a sanctuary campus, but we came really close. And what this policy provides is, one, it demonstrates our commitment to serving our students and providing a safe campus for them. We've allotted $4,000 a year to help pay for some things, to make some programming available, to help our students. I said earlier we reviewed our policies. We provide Know Your Rights workshops for our students. We are talking about doing one of these cards, which we ask or have gotten to help folks who are undocumented carry around with them so they know what their rights are if ICE stops them or if someone comes to their house. You don't need to open the door, even if it's ICE, right? But very, very many of our immigrants don't know that. We've partnered with local attorneys, particular alumni that are attorneys, immigration attorneys, to provide pro bono legal advice for our students. We've helped with fees just to get them through to figure out what might be next for them. We put out a statement, if ICE were to come to our campus, or Immigration Customs Enforcement, who the point person on our campus is to refer ICE to. Now, we're a small campus. We don't necessarily anticipate ICE to show up to our campuses, but if they do, I'm the point person. So I've become well-versed on how to determine whether their subpoena is a real subpoena or not. The biggest thing for us that's had an impact on our campus is Undocumented ally training, which some of your campuses may do, where we provide training for faculty and staff on the laws of our land, the types of emotional issues or support we can provide our students, psychological support, how to refer them. The other thing we're currently doing, those of you who are in communities that may have some active churches with this issue, is partnering with churches. to maybe one particular church in our area. We're a historically Quaker institution, so we have a Quaker church that's in the neighborhood that we're talking about, can we provide it as a sanctuary space if there's ever a need for a sanctuary space. We also partner with nonprofits in the area to help figure out what type of resources we could provide, pro bono work, you name it. Now, we're in LA, we're in the LA area, so there's a lot of nonprofits who are doing this kind of work that we can partner with. But I would challenge you to go back to your campuses and find those resources in your community so you can refer students, and to also personally do some homework and get familiar. Now, immigration is a big topic. It's a very complex topic. It's not a simple topic or a simple issue, but it impacts all of us. You know, pre-DACA was tough. I worked with students before DACA was initiated, and we did a lot of counseling. You know, for those students, the challenges were, can I major in something that would require some kind of professional license? A particular student comes to mind, Talia. Talia wanted to be a nurse. Pre-DACA, that wasn't really going to be an option for her. So we started talking about changing majors. And when DACA actually got passed, the tears that were in her eyes, because she felt like, I can do this. I can be a nurse. It's awesome for her to see her just excited about that. But now as I interact with her, now that she's a nurse in the Portland area in Oregon, she still will occasionally check in, and I'll check in with her, and the anxiety she's facing about what happens if DACA ends. So what kind of action do I want you to take? I want you to go back and call your congressperson, your senator, and really push for some type of reform needs to happen. And they do listen. They do take those calls. So please, please don't leave this place without feeling like you can do something on this issue. Don't continue the cycle of shattering these students' dreams, the undocumented population's dreams. Let's not continue to defer those dreams. Thank you very much.